The Tale of Man-E-Faces. Long ago, when Prince Adam of Eternia was still a child, there was a great actor in the country called Man-E-Faces for the many and various characters he could become when on stage. As the prince grew older and found his destiny as He-Man, Man-E-Faces grew in fame and was hailed as the greatest actor in the country. He acted in the royal palace of Eternia for the king and queen, dined with them, and was treated as an honoured guest by all of the Eternia nobility. And then something happened. Something which changed Man-E-Faces beyond all recognition and made him a monster. "I'm not too sure about this idea," said Evil Lyn dubiously. Skeletor looked at her angrily. "You are not too sure about it? What has it got to do with you? You won't be the one to carry out the spell, so you have no need to approve or otherwise." Evil Lyn glared at him. "I wasn't offering approval," she snapped. "I really have no interest in this spell, but I can see that He-Man will be filled with revenge when he discovers it." "He-Man?" Skeletor spat. "That ape? Tell me, what do you think he could do? By the time he finds out, our victim will be ready to become his enemy, and He-Man will soon be in our power." Evil Lyn smiled. "If that happens, I shall be happy," she said. "If anyone can do it, you can, Skeletor." The speech came to an end, and for a moment there was complete silence as Man-E-Faces stood on the stage. Then the applause burst out, cheers and shouts of appreciation. The actor bowed gracefully. For such a big man, he was a very elegant one, and his acting was so excellent that he could take on the part of even a dwarf or a midget without the ridiculous stooping and grovelling that lesser actors used, and achieve a perfectly convincing air where they could not. The greatest actor in the whole of Eternia, it was said, and as he watched, Prince Adam agreed wholeheartedly. "We must invite him up to supper with us," the Queen whispered in her son's ear. Adam nodded with a smile. He could always trust his mother to know the train of his thoughts, at least most of the time. The Queen held out her hand to the actor. "I am very pleased that you can perform for us tonight," she said. "My son especially has been looking forward to it for a long time." Man-E-Faces bent low over her hand. "Your Majesty is most gracious," he muttered. "Most kind." "It really seemed as though you were the character itself," said Adam. "Do you pretend that you are, or does it just seem like that?" "Your Highness, to be a good actor, not only do you have to pretend to be the character, you must actually be the character for as long as the play lasts." Adam laughed. "I see. Well, don't you ever get confused from one play to the next? Do you ever start to play one character when you should be doing another?" Man-E-Faces smiled at the young prince. "Only when I am tired," he answered. "Sometimes, when that is the case, I feel as though there are several different personalities inside me struggling to get out. Each of them a part of me, yet none of them totally me." Outside the window a dark cloaked shape stood listening. As Man-E-Faces spoke, it had been laughing to itself. Now, hearing this, it shook with the force of its laughter. "Several personalities waiting to get out," it whispered to itself. "Would just 3 suit you better?" "Have you heard the news?" demanded Teela, bursting in as Adam was brushing Cringer's glossy coat. "Why must you do that?" said Adam crossly, as Cringer leapt into his arms for safety, knocking most of the breath out of his body. "You know noises frighten him. What news?" "Man-E-Faces has just gone missing," said Teela. "Just vanished the night after his performance here. Nobody's seen him since, and his home is deserted." Adam was busy soothing Cringer, who was trembling all over. "Didn't you hear me?" said Teela impatiently. He looked up. "Oh yes, but I expect he's just gone off on a short holiday somewhere. He was telling me about being tired after doing performances. That'll be all it is." "It's not," said Teela. "He had another play to do this week, and he's never let anyone down in his life before. Adam, it's just not like him." She looked back at the prince, who was once again brushing Cringer's coat. "Well, aren't you going to do anything about it?" she asked. Adam looked up in surprise. "What can I do? Search every hotel in Eternia because you think Man-E-Faces has gone off somewhere? Listen, it'll just be a holiday, that's all. Stop worrying." Teela glared at him angrily. "If you weren't the heir to the throne," she threatened, "I'd slap you into doing something useful. Really, I cursed the day when I was made your bodyguard. If there was any justice, you'd have disappeared long ago." The door slammed behind her as she stormed out. Adam looked down at Cringer. "Come on," he said. "We have no time to waste." Pulling out his magic sword, he struck it against the stone floor of his room. "By the power of Grayskull!" he cried, and in a flash, He-Man and Battle Cat stood ready for action. Where do we start looking? Asked Tila as the attack track screamed over the ground. There's such a lot of Eternia, and he could be anywhere. He-Man turned to smile at her. You're right, this will be a long search, but we must find him. I suspect that Skeletor may have something to do with his disappearance, and Man-E-Faces is hardly equipped to defend himself against enemies like that. They travelled for half a day before Tila gave a cry and pointed. Look, He-Man! There he is! The attack track slowed and stopped, and there in front of them was Man-E-Faces, looking pale, confused and bewildered. What's happening? He asked pitifully. Why am I out here? I don't remember anything. It's all right now, Tila said soothingly, as she and He-Man helped the exhausted actor onto their vehicle. We'll soon have you safely back in Eternal City, where you can rest. Can you remember anything at all? Asked He-Man gently. Don't make yourself even more tired, just try to remember what you can. I can remember leaving the royal palace after I had acted for the king and queen of Prince Adam, and I remember getting back to my home. But after that I don't remember much at all, except that I was in some kind of metal cage, with wires everywhere. His voice died away as he fell into a deep sleep. A metal cage, said Tila softly. Do you think he's been held prisoner by Skeletor and those evil partners of his? Or you don't think they've done anything horrible to him, do you? Well, he seems alright now, pointed out He-Man, but I wouldn't leap to the conclusion that he's totally unharmed until we can get him safely back to a doctor in Eternos. I don't like the sound of those wires. No, agreed Tila, and her words were cut off by a savage grip around her throat. Bringing an attack track to a sharp halt, He-Man turned to see Man-E's face horribly changed into that of a savage, non-human creature, snarling and growling in murderous rage. He-Man gripped the monster's claws in his hands and forced them away from Tila's throat, while the thing that had once been Man-E-Faces tried to bite his hands with sharp, deadly fangs. He-Man pulled the monster away from attack track, while Tila reached for a freeze ray, but there was no need to use it. With his incredible strength, He-Man had overpowered the monster and knocked it unconscious. He stood over it, panting. By the goddess, said Tila, her voice shaking. What was that? He-Man took her hand. That was Man-E, I'm afraid. When he told us about the metal cage and the wires, it set me thinking about some similar stories I've heard, where people have gone missing and then reappeared with split personalities, mostly calm, but then suddenly turning savage. They died soon after they returned, worn out by the sudden changes taking place in their bodies, and before they died there was a period of deliriousness when they spoke of a skeleton and a metal cage and a feeling of wanting to kill every living thing in sight. Tila stared in horror. Does that mean that Man-E will die? Can we do nothing to save him? He-Man shook his head. We can only try to find a remedy, and so far none of Eternia's scientists have discovered what does this to people. There was a clanking sound behind them. They turned to see Man-E struggling to his feet. Tila gasped. The monster had gone, but in its place was a mighty mechanised robot which lumbered towards them. He-Man, what can we do? Cried Tila. She backed away from the robot and shouted, Stop! To her surprise, the robot stopped dead in its tracks. He-Man and her companion exchanged glances. Then He-Man walked steadily round the monstrous robot, looking at it carefully. Take one step forward, he commanded at last. Obediently, the huge robot took one step forward and stopped. Tila stared at him. Does this mean that we can command him to do anything? She asked. He-Man nodded gravely. But it also means that Skeletor can do the same, he said. If he should get hold of Man-E again, they could create havoc in Eternia. We must take him home at once and try and find a remedy. And that is what happened to you, finished Tila, as they visited Man-E some time later. The actor lay in his bed with tears running slowly down his face. The news he had just heard made him feel almost physically ill with shock and anger. Just relax, He-Man advised softly. There's bound to be a remedy for this. It might take time, but one will be found in the end. And until then, what do I do? Asked Man-E. I can never act again, that's for sure. And I'm never going to be sure that I won't kill the people I love best when that thing has hold of me. It would be much better if I died now. He-Man gripped the actor's hand. Now listen, you might not be able to act professionally, but you can act for me. Skeletor is responsible for this, and I have been at war with him for a very long time. We need your help in winning that war, Man-E, and I know that you can be very useful. That strength of yours matches Beastman's, and if you were to become a robot, we can command you to do anything. Man-E considered it. And suppose the Skeletor turns me into the monster? You must think of everything, He-Man. He-Man smiled. Well, I was able to deal with you earlier when we found you, so I don't see any problems on that score. However, I can see that there might be problems when you are with Tila, but as long as she carries her freeze ray set on stun at all times, that can be overcome too. There was a long pause. I'll help you, said Manny finally. It's the least I can do to repay you for your kindness to me and to revenge myself on Skeletor. He fell silent, and all three of them thought with horror of what Skeletor had done to the finest actor in the whole of Eternia. I'll never let you do this to anyone else, thought He-Man. He clenched his fists. And I'll do anything I can to make sure that you never achieve the power you want in Eternia. By the goddess, Skeletor, you have made a very bad enemy this day.